Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
Imagine this. You're pushing through another 12-hour day at the family business you built from the ground up. Your heart racing like it's trying to escape your chest, and suddenly everything goes black. Next thing you know, you're waking up in a sterile hospital bed. Wires snaking across your arms, and the only family notification goes out to the people who raised you, but they don't even bother showing their faces, while your own sister is out there posting pictures of a peaceful family. Dinner, like your collapse, was the best thing that ever happened to their quiet little world. What kind of messed up loyalty is that, and how long can you stay silent before it all comes crashing down? Especially when the empire you slaved over starts showing cracks that no one else seems willing to fix. That was me, Emily Harper, 42 years old, and the backbone of Harper Freight Solutions, a mid-sized logistics outfit my parents had bootstrapped in the suburbs of Chicago back when I was just a kid tagging along after school, dreaming of the day I'd take the reins and turn it into something unbreakable. But instead, there I lay in the emergency room at Mercy General on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The acrid smell of antiseptic mixing with the faint metallic tang of my own sweat as consciousness trickled back. My vision blurry from the fluorescent glare overhead while a kind-faced nurse adjusted the Ford drip and explained how I'd collapsed mid-sentence during our weekly team huddle. My body finally rebelling against the relentless grind of deadlines and double shifts that had become my normal since Dad's health scare 2 years prior left me picking up the slack without so much as a thank you. She mentioned they'd reached out to my emergency contacts right away, Mom and Dad first, of course, the numbers etched into my phone since high school, and I nodded weakly, clinging to the hope that despite their history of prioritizing the business over birthdays, this time the gravity of it all would pull them through rush-hour traffic from Oak Park, visions of them bursting through the doors with coffee and concern flashing in my mind like scenes from those feel-good movies we binge on weekends. But as the clock on the wall ticked past 5, then 6, then 7 without a single footfall or ringtone breaking the monotonous beeps of the heart monitor, that hope curdled into a hollow ache deep in my chest, the kind that whispers you've been invisible longer than you realized, even to the ones who should know you best. To distract myself from the growing void, I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, scrolling through notifications with fingers still shaky from whatever adrenaline crash had knocked me out, and that's when the gut punch landed harder than the feint itself. Jessica's Instagram post popping up in my feed, a glossy shot of her perched at our family dining table with Mom and Dad, candles flickering and plates piled high with roast chicken and mashed potatoes, her caption beaming, "Family time at last, finally some peace around here," while she tagged me like it was an inside joke. The likes and comments from our extended circle piling up as if my hospital gown and 4-pole were just a minor inconvenience in their idyllic evening, and I stared at it for what felt like hours, the betrayal sinking in layer by layer because Jessica, my younger sister by 5 years, had always been the golden child, the one who flitted through college with a half-hearted business degree before ditching it for influencer gigs that paid in free trips and sponsorships, leaving me to shoulder the real work at the company while she dropped in for photo ops and vague strategy sessions that mostly involved her pitching social media tie-ins nobody needed. I stayed quiet, of course, because confrontation had never been my style in this family where Dad's word was law and Mom's passive smiles smoothed over every rift, so I just liked the post with a thumbs up emoji. I immediately regretted typing out a message to the group chat that read, "Looks amazing, wish I could join, tell everyone I'm okay," the words tasting like ash even as I hit send. My mind racing with memories of all the times I'd covered for Jessica's slip-ups, like the client account she nearly tanked last quarter with her impulsive ad spend, only for me to swoop in and salvage it without fanfare, and now here she was, celebrating the peace my absence apparently brought, as if my collapse was a vacation they all deserved. The doctor swung by around 8, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a clipboard full of vitals, diagnosing acute exhaustion compounded by hypertension that she'd seen too often in high-stress professionals like me, lecturing about the perils of burnout in family-run outfits where boundaries blur into oblivion, her words hitting close to home as she prescribed rest, beta blockers, and a follow-up in a week, but rest felt like a foreign concept when my inbox was already lighting up with urgent queries from the office, reminders that the freight routes wouldn't reroute themselves, and the holiday rush loomed like a freight train on the horizon. By morning, the initial shock had dulled into a resolute numbness, the nurses sharing stories of other patients ditched by kin to remind me I wasn't alone, yet that only amplified the sting because my family wasn't just absent. They were actively reveling in it, and as discharge papers rustled in my hands with warnings to monitor my symptoms, I plotted my return to the office not as the broken cog, but as someone finally seeing the machine for what it was. Slipping back into my routine that Monday with a polished facade, nodding through sympathetic murmurs from coworkers who knew better than to pry, but underneath, a spark ignited when I overheard Dad on a call during my first team meeting, his voice gruff as he referenced irregularities in the projections Jessica's team handled, a vague hint at the discrepancies I'd long suspected in her reports, numbers that funded her lifestyle while ours strained, and rather than voice it aloud, I wove a subtle adjustment into the client deck I presented later that week, highlighting a minor error in her data that made her projections look inflated during the review, not enough to accuse, but just sufficient to draw questioning glances from the board and a flustered explanation from her that fell flat, the small victory warming me like contraband. Coffee on a cold day as I watched her confidence crack ever so slightly, a witty nudge toward accountability without burning bridges I might still need. The day wound down with the office emptying into the twilight, my energy waning, but my resolve sharpening, until my phone vibrated insistently on the desk. The screen revealing 65 missed calls from the home line accumulated over my silent recovery days, each one a potential olive branch or demand I wasn't ready to face, capped by Dad's latest text cutting through the silence. Emily, we need you back at the office immediately, urgent situation unfolding, don't make us wait, the words carrying that familiar weight of expectation laced with something sharper. Perhaps urgency born of their own unraveling secrets, and for the first time in years, I didn't jump to respond, instead flipping the device face down against the wood, letting the unanswered buzz fade into the quiet hum of the emptying building, the uncertainty coiling around me like the Chicago fog rolling in off the lake, wondering what storm this summons truly heralded and whether I was finally ready to step into it on my own terms. Flipping my phone face down that evening didn't stop the persistent buzz of notifications echoing through the quiet office. Each vibration a reminder of the tangled web of expectations and omissions that had defined my role in the Harper family for as long as I could remember, but by the next morning, with the sun filtering through the blinds of my modest apartment in Lincoln Park, I gathered myself enough to listen to those 65 missed calls, the voicemails unfolding like a reluctant confession from a family that suddenly remembered my existence only after the crisis had passed without major fallout, starting with Mom's hesitant messages laced with feigned worry about how they'd been swamped with a critical shipment delay that kept them from the hospital, her voice cracking just enough to tug at the old strings of guilt I'd let her pull since childhood, followed by Dad's gruffer ones demanding updates on my condition interspersed with subtle jabs about the office backlog piling up without me there to manage the marketing push for the upcoming Black Friday rush, and Jessica's loan contribution, a breezy audio clip dismissing the whole feint as probably just low blood sugar from skipping lunch again. Her tone light, as if my collapse was merely an inconvenient blip in her curated life of brunches and brand deals that she paraded across social media, without a care for the real work grinding away behind the scenes at Harper Freight Solutions. Against the doctor's stern advice to take at least a week off to let my blood pressure stabilize and avoid another episode that could land me in worse shape, I dragged myself back to the office that very afternoon. The drive through Chicago's congested loop feeling longer than usual with my head still fuzzy from the meds, and my thoughts churning over how this family dynamic had warped into something unrecognizable, where I was the invisible pillar holding up their dreams while Jessica reaped the spotlight her recent Post still stinging like salt in a fresh wound, because it wasn't just neglect, it was a celebration of it, and as I pulled into the parking lot dotted with employee sedans and the occasional trucker rig, I steeled myself for the facade of normalcy. Nodding through the concerned greetings from colleagues who'd heard whispers of my ordeal and offering up a wry joke about how even I couldn't outrun Dad's deadlines forever, the humor a thin veil over the resentment bubbling beneath, because who faints from exhaustion only to get summoned back before the 4 scars fade? The urgent matter Dad referenced turned out to be a strategy session crammed into the conference room overlooking the warehouse floor, where pallets of holiday-bound cargo stacked high under the hum of forklifts, and there he sat at the head of the table. His salt and pepper hair disheveled from what looked like a sleepless night, outlining a desperate pivot to recapture slipping market share against bigger players like UPS. His eyes lighting up when Jessica breezed in fashionably late, her laptop emblazoned with some trendy sticker and her projections folder in hand, the numbers she presented gleaming with optimistic forecasts that I immediately spotted as padded. Expenses inflated just enough to cover what I suspected were her personal indulgences, like that Miami getaway she'd captioned as recharging for the fam biz, but calling her out would mean igniting a firestorm in front of the team, so I held my tongue. Contributing my steadier analysis on customer retention that Dad acknowledged with a curt nod, the favoritism toward her evident in how he lingered on her ideas while glossing over mine. A pattern as old as our sibling rivalry, but sharper now in the wake of my hospital silence. Lunch that day devolved into an awkward family extension at the nearby Italian spot where Mom had insisted we meet to check in properly, her arms enveloping me in a hug that smelled of lavender and unspoken apologies as she fussed over the menu, steering me toward the salad while Jessica regaled us with tales of her latest collaboration with a lifestyle brand, the conversation flowing around my faint like it was yesterday's weather. And when she pulled up her phone to show more photos from that peaceful dinner, I couldn't resist a lighthearted dig, saying it must have been bliss without my usual questions about quarterly goals interrupting the vibe, earning a forced laugh from Dad and an eye roll from Jessica. That masked her discomfort, the humor diffusing the tension just enough to keep me from unloading the hurt right there amid the clatter of plates and the aroma of garlic bread. Though deep down I knew downplaying the red flags like those suspicious line items in her reports was a choice that frustrated even me, loyalty blinding me to the sabotage staring me in the face. Back at my desk that afternoon, the office chatter turned to Jessica's post when a coworker from sales swung by with coffee. Casually mentioning how it had sparked some gossip about family drama and seizing the moment for a subtle payback, I let slip a harmless detail about how the peaceful evening had coincided with a minor client hiccup she'd overlooked, framing it as an innocent observation that rippled through the break room whispers, watching from afar as Jessica's confident stride faltered when she overheard and shot me a glare that promised retaliation, the witty leak satisfying in its understatement. Without crossing into outright war, a small reclaiming of ground in this battlefield of blood ties and balance sheets. As the week dragged on with me ignoring the doctor's emails urging more rest and instead burying myself in revisions to the campaign that Dad kept tweaking based on Jessica's input, fatigue nipping at my heels like an unwelcome shadow, I couldn't shake the nagging discrepancies in the financials I'd glimpsed during a quick file dive, patterns of redirected funds that hinted at more than just sloppy accounting. But before I could probe further, I caught Dad in his office on a hushed phone call as I passed by to drop off reports, his voice low and edged with frustration as he argued about cutting losses on the weak links to stabilize the core operations before the auditors come sniffing, the words hanging in the air like smoke after the words weak links pierced through, leaving me rooted in the hallway with my pulse quickening, wondering if that vague threat encompassed the daughter who'd just returned from the brink or if it pointed to something far more insidious brewing in the heart of our family empire, the uncertainty settling over me heavier than the gathering clouds outside, propelling me toward whatever confrontation loomed next. Overhearing Dad's cryptic phone conversation about cutting losses lingered in my mind like a bad aftertaste from one of Mom's overly salted casseroles. propelling me through the following days at Harper Freight Solutions with a heightened vigilance that turned every casual exchange into a potential clue in the unraveling mystery of our family's priorities, where the warehouse echoes of loading docks and the constant ring of client lines served as a relentless backdrop to the personal drama simmering just beneath the surface. And as November's chill seeped into the Chicago air, frosting the windows of the office building, I found myself pushing harder than ever to prove my indispensability. Ignoring the doctor's follow-up reminders about monitoring my stress levels, because admitting vulnerability in this environment felt like handing them ammunition to sideline me further, especially when Jessica's influence started manifesting more overtly in meetings where her suggestions on digital campaigns took precedence over my data-driven strategies, Dad nodding along with an approval he rarely extended to me despite my years of turning around flagging accounts and securing partnerships that kept the lights on. The office tension thickened during a midweek strategy huddle, the conference room stuffy with the scent of stale coffee and printer ink as Dad outlined aggressive targets for the holiday season, his voice booming with that old-school determination that had built the company from a single truck to a fleet of dozens. But when Jessica chimed in with ideas for influencer tie-ins that mirrored her own network without crediting the groundwork I'd laid in social metrics, I bit back the urge to point out the overlap, opting instead for a supportive comment that masked my frustration because direct confrontation would only paint me as the jealous older sister in a dynamic where she played the innovative darling and I the reliable drudge, a role I'd accepted for too long out of some misguided sense of duty that now felt more like chains forged in childhood expectations of being the one who always stepped up. Mom's unannounced drop-ins added another layer of unease, her arrivals timed suspiciously around lunch hours with Tupperware in hand and conversations that danced around my faint, focusing instead on how proud she was of Jessica's fresh energy, revitalizing the brand, her eyes pleading for me to join in the praise even as she slipped in subtle digs about needing to pace myself better, like my collapse was a personal failing rather than a symptom of the overload they'd imposed. And in those moments, a wry humor bubbled up as I quipped about how if fainting was the new team-building exercise, maybe we should schedule it for the next retreat, eliciting polite chuckles that didn't reach her eyes, but bought me space to deflect without exploding. Though internally I couldn't help wondering what in the heck kind of mother watches one daughter crumble under pressure while cheering the other's carefree ascent, the light vulgarity of that thought a private vent for the rage I kept leashed to maintain the fragile equilibrium. The real twist surfaced during an after-hours audit I volunteered for to clear my head, the dim glow of my computer screen illuminating stacks of financial reports in the quiet accounting wing where the hum of servers was the only company. And there amid the spreadsheets, patterns emerged like ghosts in the machine, small, recurring withdrawals from project budgets allocated to Jessica's initiatives, funneled toward expenses labeled vaguely as team incentives that actually traced back to family vacations like the one she'd posted from Napa Valley last summer, the kind of discrepancies that screamed low-level embezzlement overlooked or even enabled by our parents in their quest to keep her motivated and the family facade intact. A discovery that twisted my stomach because it wasn't just theft, it was a betrayal of the trust I'd invested in this place since interning here at 18, dreaming of shared success that now looked more like selective sabotage. Frustrated as any outsider watching might be with my choice to handle it subtly rather than marching into Dad's office with printouts blazing, I chose a path of calculated redirection, quietly reallocating the company's complimentary wellness stipend. The perk Jessica loved flaunting in her fitness reels, from individual executive accounts to a broader employee pool, couching it in an email to HR as a morale-boosting efficiency measure that aligned with our core values of inclusivity. The move landing just right as her access lapsed without fanfare, and she texted me in confusion about the glitch. My response a polite suggestion to check with admin that carried the undercurrent of payback. A witty reroute that left her scrambling while I savored the quiet satisfaction of evening the scales without a scene. Yet as the audit wrapped and I powered down for the night, the weight of those findings pressed heavier, compounded by a family conference call that evening where Mom hinted at evolving roles to match our growth, her tone evasive and Dad's grunts of agreement carrying an ominous finality. And it was in clearing out an archived inbox later that I unearthed the hidden email thread buried under layers of spam filters, a chain from Jessica to our cousin at a competing logistics firm in Milwaukee, casually brainstorming succession planning. With phrases like, "Emily's solid but too predictable for the digital shift," "scouting for her replacement to inject some real innovation," the words hitting like a freight truck in the silence of my apartment, amplifying the betrayal to a roar as I sat there with the screen's glow reflecting in my wide eyes, the impending storm of their plot now crystallizing into something personal and vicious, leaving me to ponder how far I'd let this fester before striking back in ways they couldn't ignore. Staring at that incriminating email thread from Jessica to our cousin late into the night in my dimly lit apartment, the cursor blinking accusingly on the screen as if urging me to forward it straight to Dad's inbox and blow the lid off their little succession scheme, I wrestled with the dilemma that had haunted me since the hospital discharge. The pull of loyalty to the family name clashing violently with the raw truth screaming from every falsified line item and whispered plot because exposing it all could salvage my place at Harper Freight Solutions, but at the cost of shattering the illusion of unity Mom had nurtured like a fragile houseplant through decades of overlooked resentments and uneven burdens, leaving me to pace the worn hardwood floors with a mug of chamomile tea cooling in my hands, its steam curling up like the doubts twisting in my gut over whether preserving the business I'd helped build outweighed the personal toll of being labeled the predictable one. Ready for replacement. The next morning brought no clarity, only a heavier fog as I navigated the office corridors buzzing with pre-holiday frenzy, the air thick with the scent of fresh printed flyers and the distant rumble of incoming shipments. And during a routine check-in with Dad, his office cluttered with coffee-stained maps and client contracts, he casually mentioned expanding the warehouse footprint as his legacy project to secure our edge against the big-box competitors. His enthusiasm blind to how Jessica's inflated budgets had already siphoned resources from it, a blind spot that frustrated me to no end because calling it out now would seem like sour grapes from the sister sidelined by her own blood. As the day wore on, I dove deeper into the financials during what started as a quick ledger review, but stretched into a late-night audit under the harsh fluorescence of the back room, the solitude amplifying every keystroke and the patterns unfolding like a detective novel I never wanted to read. Series of vendor payments looping suspiciously back to Jessica's personal ventures, disguised as marketing trials, but funding everything from her high-end retreats to the flashy car she bragged about in family group chats. And the kicker came when cross-referencing emails revealed Mom's approving notes on flexible allocations for family motivation, confirming their complicity in this quiet embezzlement, all in the name of bolstering Jessica's role to keep the unity Dad preached from board meetings to bedtime stories, a revelation that hit harder than my faint because it wasn't mere favoritism, it was a calculated erosion of my equity in the empire we'd all bled for. Twisting the knife with the realization that my exhaustion-fueled collapse might have been the convenient catalyst they'd waited for to ease me out without a fight. Humor edged into the absurdity of it during a family video call that evening, where Mom spun excuses about the discrepancies as creative accounting to stay agile in a tough market, her face flushed on the screen as if selling me on the merits of their oversight, and I couldn't help injecting a dry quip about how if agility meant funding sisters' spa days over server upgrades, maybe we should rebrand as Harper Daydream Logistics, the light-hearted jab drawing a nervous titter from her and a stern look from Dad that masked his unease. But internally, what in the heck kind of unity builds on one child's gain at the expense of another's? Breaking point, the thought of vulgar undercurrent to my simmering resolve as I chose not to press, the delay and revenge likely baffling anyone piecing together my hesitations from the outside. Yet it stemmed from that deep-seated fear of becoming the family pariah who tore it all down. Building toward a confrontation that hung in the air like unspoken thunder, I faced the dilemma head-on the following afternoon when Dad pulled me aside for input on his pet project, his eyes expectant as he outlined budgets already strained by Jessica's diversions, and seizing the opportunity for payback, I suggested a minor adjustment in the projections by planting a false lead. An overstated cost for environmental compliance tied directly to the expansion that would flag during the next internal review, framing it as an inadvertent data entry error originating from their oversight committee. The witty sabotage unfolding beautifully over the next 2 days as emails flew with Dad and the execs, scrambling to reconcile the glitch that spotlighted inefficiencies in their watch, my feigned helpfulness in the fixes only amplifying their embarrassment while I watched from my desk with a concealed smirk. The satisfaction of that under-the-radar reversal a bomb against the growing conflict that threatened to consume everything. The atmosphere of uncertainty thickened as winter's grip tightened on the city, snow flurries dancing outside the windows like elusive answers to the questions piling up. In my mind, until my scheduled hospital follow-up that Friday afternoon shifted the ground beneath me entirely, the waiting room's sterile quiet broken only by the flip of magazines as I anticipated routine vitals. But the doctor's expression turned grave upon reviewing my latest blood work and scans, her voice measured as she explained traces of airborne toxins, volatile compounds common in poorly ventilated industrial spaces like our warehouse, lingering in my system at levels that could explain the faint and ongoing fatigue. And when I pressed on the source, she hesitated before noting that maintenance logs from similar facilities often revealed deliberate delays in filter changes to cut costs. A hint that sent ice through my veins because if our HVAC had been neglected knowingly, it pointed to sabotage aimed at wearing me down until I quit, the implication of family complicity in something so insidious leaving me gripping the armrests. The impending revenge now laced with a terror that demanded answers I wasn't sure I wanted, propelling the conflict to a razor edge as I drove home through the gathering dusk, the pieces aligning in ways that promised no easy resolution. Gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary as I navigated the snow-slicked streets away from the hospital, the doctor's words about those insidious toxins echoing in my ears like a warning siren that our office's neglected maintenance wasn't just penny-pinching, but potentially a deliberate ploy to erode my health and force me out quietly. I felt the full weight of the betrayal crashing down in the confines of my car, the heater blasting warm air that did nothing to thaw the chill of realization that my family, the very ones who'd built Harper Freight Solutions on promises of shared legacy, might have orchestrated this slow poison to pave the way for Jessica's unchallenged rise. A scheme that tied together every clue from the embezzled funds to the replacement emails in a web of greed and favoritism that left me questioning if the fate had been the breaking point they engineered all along. Arriving home to the quiet sanctuary of my apartment, I spread out the printed financials and screenshots across the kitchen table under the harsh overhead light, connecting the dots late into the night with a bottle of red wine for company. The patterns confirming Jessica's hand in siphoning thousands through ghost vendors while Mom and Dad signed off with winking approvals disguised as incentive programs, their motive crystallizing into a plot to buy her out my share at an undervalued price post my health issues, using the collapse as leverage to paint me as unreliable, the kind of corporate maneuver wrapped in familial love that twisted my stomach because it wasn't abstract theft, it was a personal erasure of the daughter who'd sacrificed weekends and relationships to keep the trucks rolling since my 20s. The emotional showdown ignited the next morning in Dad's office, where he summoned me under the pretense of discussing the expansion budget, his face etched with the strain of secrets as he paced behind his desk cluttered with ledgers that hid more than they revealed. And when I laid out the toxin report alongside queries about the HVAC logs showing months of ignored service calls I'd personally flagged in emails they'd dismissed, his denial crumbled into sputtering excuses about cost-cutting in a volatile market. But the real fracture came when I pulled up the dossier of embezzlement trails, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands as I confronted the favoritism that had them overlooking Jessica's schemes to protect the family's future. Mom bursting in midway with tears streaming down her face, her pleas for understanding the pressures of legacy ringing hollow against the evidence of their complicity in sabotaging mine. Viewers might cringe at my choice to pause there, offering a measured path forward instead of slamming the door on their hypocrisy, because walking away meant abandoning the company I'd poured my soul into, a dilemma rooted in that stubborn Harper grit Dad had instilled. Yet it frustrated even me as Jessica stormed in via video from her latest trip, her indignation flaring over the misunderstandings before crumbling into defensive admissions of just borrowing what the business owed me, her words confirming the twists I'd chased, but leaving the deeper why. Was it pure avarice, resentment of my steadiness, or a misguided bid to shield her from real work, shrouded in ambiguity that only fueled the growing conflict? The room thick with unspoken accusations as Dad slumped into his chair, the weight of exposure cracking his authoritative facade. Humor pierced the tension when I quipped that if toxins were the new family bonding tool, maybe we should bottle them for the competitors, drawing a choked laugh from Mom that broke the ice just enough for negotiation, but underneath, what in the heck kind of legacy thrives on lies and low blows? The thought of vulgar edged to my resolve as I orchestrated the ultimate revenge in the ensuing chaos, compiling an irrefutable audit packet and routing it directly to the external compliance firm under the guise of proactive due diligence, framing the discrepancies as systemic oversights I'd uncovered to protect the company's integrity. The masterful pivot unfolding over the weekend as their frantic calls lit up my phone, Dad's gravelly apologies laced with panic, Jessica's texts begging for cover, while the auditors descended Monday morning. My position not just secured, but elevated as the whistleblower savior they couldn't afford to lose. The satisfaction of that witty flip landing like a perfectly timed counterpunch that reclaimed my stake without total rupture. Shares renegotiated on my terms amid tearful family huddles that promised reform but delivered only vague commitments. In the final stretch, as the snow blanketed the warehouse yard in a deceptive peace and the office hummed with uneasy normalcy, the major truths of their plot laid bare in boardroom reckonings that stripped away the illusions I'd clung to for years. I stood at the precipice of choice, forgiving enough to stay and rebuild on monitored ground or severing ties to forge something untainted, the ambiguity lingering like the unanswered voicemails piling up from extended kin wondering about the family drama, provoking endless reflections on whether blood truly waters the roots of redemption or if self-preservation demands pruning the poisonous branches. And as I powered down my computer that last evening of the year, the city lights twinkling beyond the frost-laced windows, the quiet question echoed in my mind, could peace ever follow without the shadows of what-ifs trailing behind? Or was the real empire the one I built within myself, resilient against the storms I'd weathered?